Hi, today we're talking about planning tools and techniques. My name is Mike Knudstrup, and I'm a management teacher at Florida Southern College. And most of the concepts that we are getting into today are in most management textbooks, but I'm pulling them from Robbins and Coulter. All right, why is it important to plan? Well, one of the most famous college basketball coaches there, I got a quote from him: failure to plan is planning to fail. Planning can help us find problems beforehand. It can help us find contingencies, that we might need to do. And planning in general, although it's difficult, to take that time ahead of time, usually projects go much more smoothly when we plan. So the topics I want to get into are competitor intelligence, benchmarking, forecasting, budgeting, project management, and scenario planning. All right, so let's start with competitor intelligence. Somehow you have to figure out what your competitors are doing. If you're in business or if you're trying to get a job, the competition is generally pretty fierce. All right, so you need to figure out what they're doing, who they are. And some of the most common sources, you don't have to do things that are legal, like go into their dumpsters and try to do corporate espionage, spying on them, tapping phones. What they say is 80% of what you need to get can be through pretty common sources. Those sources being your own customers, all right, your own employees, and your own suppliers. All right, customers can tell you what your competitors are offering. Employees, they usually interact with customers, or they might be out in the marketplace and they can see what competitors are doing. And suppliers likewise can help you out and say, hey, well, XYZ company is using this. Well, have you considered that? So pretty much you can get most of what you need through these kind of sources. Other sources might be through the internet, looking at press releases, or maybe going to trade shows. One element maybe that's a little sneaky for competitor intelligence is reverse engineering. That's where you take things that your competitors have made, all right, such as products, and you take them apart. Okay, and then you see how they're put together. Oh, my pen is not cooperating with me here. But right here I have an example of the B-29 bomber. All right, this was America's state-of-the-art bomber in World War II. And the Americans were flying back from a mission over Japan, and they stopped in Russia, which you would consider to be one of our allies. But they had two of these B-29 bombers, and they held the crew for a couple days. But they kept the bombers. Our allies kept the bombers. They took one apart, and they kept one to keep as a model. They reproduced our state-of-the-art bomber in less than 2 years using reverse engineering. All right. Another type of planning is known as benchmarking. That's where you look, it's similar to reverse engineering, but you look at competitors and see what they're doing. And maybe even be non-competitors, but you see what they're doing and their best practices, and you compare them to your own, and you try to copy them. My question is, why is it easier to copy than to come up with your own? Think about this. Why do companies benchmark? Maybe you benchmark all the time. Say a fellow student did really well in exams. Say, hey, what did you do? What did you study? How did you go about doing that? All right, and then you copy them. Okay, that's benchmarking. Taking their best practices. Why is it easier to copy? Well, if you know they're doing it well, you have confidence with it, so you stick to it longer. All right, so I would say one is that you can have confidence. All right, and you also save the trial and error that you would go through to get to that point. Benchmarking. If you're an athlete, for example, maybe you watch other athletes on TV and you see how they do things, and you go out and try to copy them. or maybe you have competitors and you do the same. Alright, so benchmarking is another form of planning. Forecasting is another mode of planning as well. And really what we're getting into, that I should have mentioned it in the beginning, but we're getting at tactical planning techniques. Okay, these techniques aren't really strategic. They're tactics. They're short-range tactics to get us where we want to be. Strategic planning techniques are much more long range, Strategic techniques, which we got into or we're going to get into in another slide, are based on 3 to 5 years, taking long range moves. In this chapter, we're just getting into tactics, which tactics are being short-term techniques. All right, hope you can read my writing there. Not as clear as I'd like to be. Okay, so somehow we need to forecast. We need to predict what's going on in the future. Things get much easier anyway when we forecast. When you don't forecast well, let's say you're selling something, then you either had too much or too little. All right, you have shortages or surpluses, either of which is pretty bad for you. When you have too much product on the shelf, things tend to break. It tends to get obsolete, and you often have to discount to sell it, or you have to pay for storage. So surpluses are a problem when we don't forecast well. Plus, when stuff sits on the shelves or sits in the back room, people tend to take it as well. So if we order too much, we get surpluses, or we get shortages if we don't order enough, if we don't forecast well. What's the problem if we don't forecast well and we have shortages? Well, your customer comes to your store and they get upset that you don't have it, and they leave to go to someone else's. So here's a couple pretty simple techniques for forecasting. One is monthly moving average. All right, and what I have here is a 3-month moving average. Let's say sales of some product were 10 in January, 20 in February, and 30 in March. Using a 3-month moving average forecast, what would be our forecast for April? Well, that's really just a simple average. 10 plus 20 is 30, plus 30 more is 60. So 60 divided by the last 3 months is 20. Your 3-month moving forecast for April would be 20. Now, this is not going to be exact, but we're at least trying to get some way to forecast the future. A weighted moving average applies weights to the previous month. So let's say you applied a weight of 0.2 to January, 0.3 to February, and 0.5 to March. All right, notice a couple things about my weightings here. One is that they add up, all these add up to 1. 0.2 plus 0.3 plus 0.5 equals 1. Also that I weighted the most previous month the highest. All right, so how do we do a weighting moving average forecast? Okay, so we will times, if this is a 3-month, again, a 3-month weighted moving average. So we will times the sales in January times 0.2, so we get 2 there. And we times the sales in February times the 0.3. All right, so hopefully my math's right here. We get 6, and then 0.5 times 30 in March is 15. So our 3-month weighted moving average, all right, would be how much here? Our forecast. Okay, you can do the math easily as I can. It's 23. All right, and so if we were for whatever product, like DVD players or iPhones or whatever they might be, our forecast would say, well, we need to order 23. And again, back to the weighting here. Remember, okay, the most recent month was weighted the highest. Why did I do that? Well, the most recent month is probably most indicative of what's going to be in the next month. Okay. So we want to weight March the highest because we figure that's the best predictor of what's going to happen in April. But we still want to use January and February as well. That's when you have numbers. Quantitative forecasting is when you have numbers to work with. You have a past, a history, and you can use those numbers to try to gauge what's going to happen in the future. Qualitative forecasting is when we don't have numbers to work with. And so somehow we have to figure out, say, what sales are going to be in the future, but it might be a new product. So we really have no idea. In this instance, we're going to use expert judgments. If you were selling cars and it's a whole new car that you haven't sold before, you're going to go out and ask your salespeople, say, based on past new cars, other new cars, what do you think our sales will be? So you might go out and ask 5 salespeople, and then you average it out. But the thing is you don't have much data, if any data, and so you're going to go out and maybe ask experts. Or a lot of times what they do with the economy, they'll go ask 5 or 10 economists, what they predict for the future, because the economy is always changing, and then they might average out the judgments and opinions of the experts. Alright, so quantitative is when we have numbers, qualitative forecasting is when we don't. Another planning tool I want to get into is budgeting. We probably all have a budget, whether we like it or not. Most of us don't have unlimited funds, and so we have to be careful. Budgets at first, the very starting point of a budget is a sales forecast or the revenues, and then from there we can work back for our expenses and see what we have available. Okay, probably most commonly used technique for organizations. The advantages, think of yourself. What are the advantages of budgeting? Well, I would say for the most part, it encourages a sense of discipline. I mean, if all you got is your budget, then you're very disciplined, and it encourages you to be thrifty and to think carefully and get the most value for what you do. It helps you compare different departments to see how they're doing in terms of their budget as well. The disadvantages, there are a couple. If anybody has ever tried to budget, well, for those of you who try to budget your money and where your budget is tight, you know that budgeting takes time and effort. Time and effort. And that time and effort could be spent doing other things, but instead you got to keep track of your expenditures. You may also lose out on opportunities. Say you want to buy a new phone and you have, who knows, $100 available to buy the new phone, but a great phone is out there for $200. Well, it'll give you much more value and maybe enhance your productivity. If it's not in your budget, you can't do it. Okay, so budgets, especially when they're really rigid, won't allow you to take advantage of opportunities. But most organizations, most people have to have budget. There's just not unlimited funds to go around. And so it's a necessary part of doing business and living. Another planning technique I want to talk about is project management, a one-time set of activities. Okay, you got to get it done on time, within budget, and according to your specifications. So first part of project planning is setting your objectives, and then what is your sequence of activities. First you got A, then you've got B, then you got C, and then hopefully you complete your project. So you sequence your activities, you assign responsibilities to individuals for those different activities, and then you compare performance to standard. Most people I talk to in project management say, you look at it and you think, well, doing the project and getting it done maybe is the hard part. The techniques or the technical side of a project side is, planning this out and thinking what needs to be done. But after you've done some projects and you're kind of familiar with them, that steps aside. And most people that I talk to who are in project management say the people side of project management is the most difficult part of it. You know, once you kind of know the projects, it's getting people to do things on time. And a lot of times, the people who are on a project, it's a temporary project. So if you're the project leader, these are not people who report directly to you. You do not sign their paycheck. They're there temporarily to work on your project, and then they go back to their regular jobs. So you got to find ways to motivate them. You know, and they might even be older than you. They might have more experience. So you got to find ways to work with these folks who you are their, you might be their kind of their informal leader, but you don't have formal control over them. You don't sign their paycheck. So what are some things you can do to get these people on your side? Well, one is perhaps you meet with them and you talk with them about their career goals and kind of see how the project can fit in with maybe some skills they need to learn and their career goals. So you put it in their long-term interest to be a good player on the project. In general, with projects that I do, you know, especially people that are older, I kind of try to make them partners with me. You know, I'm not necessarily as much their boss, although there are times I have to be. You know, if things aren't working out, the quality is not good or the time isn't. But I try to get a sense of partnership with them, because I work with people who are my own age or older, and they don't need heavy-handed management. So I try to make them partners. Another thing that I've heard of, I haven't done myself, is but when the project is all done, you write a memo detailing the project and their contribution, and you give it to their regular or formal boss. And so ends up feedback about the project ends up getting back to the person who signs their paycheck more or less. All right, so that's project management. Initially, maybe the technical side is difficult. You know, the sequence of activities and making sure it's done right. But after projects have been done a while, really it moves to the people side. That gets to be the challenging part. Last planning technique I want to get into is called scenario planning. All right, a scenario is a view of what the future will be, and obviously, whatever part, you know, wherever you are, or wherever you live, or whatever business you are, there's rarely a 100% consistent view of what the future is going to be. So scenario planning plays out different potential future situations and tries to consider, you know, how might we react to these different situations. Okay, so, you know, someone in business might try to play out, well, what if we had a natural disaster? What would we need to do so that we could be prepared for that? What if a competitor, did I write that wrong? Competitor moves in across the street. All right, how would we handle that? Okay, what if the economy gets worse? What would we do then? So you try to play out these different scenarios and at least hopefully be in a position so that you can react quickly. And if there are some very likely scenarios, you want to be in position so that you can respond and be in good shape. As an individual person, you know, perhaps you're considering looking for a job in a couple of years. So the economy one might be really relevant to you. Say that 3 different scenarios are a bad economy, okay, a moderate economy, and there's a good economy when you graduate. All right. And you play out these different scenarios. Well, how hard will it be to find a job in these different ones? If it's a good economy in terms of finding a job, well, that's going to be pretty easy, pretty straightforward. There'll be plenty of jobs out there. If it's a bad economy, okay, this is going to be difficult. When there's a bad economy, there are a lot of people looking for work, and you might think, well, what do I need to do with the possibility that there's a bad economy? Well, maybe you maybe you get prepared by getting an internship, or maybe even considering going to graduate school. Okay, and those kind of things. And so, in a moderate economy, maybe it would be kind of the same. Well, yeah, it's not going to be as bad as a bad economy, but it will be a challenge. So, I'll maybe try to do some of the same things that I would in a bad economy to be prepared. So scenario planning, you play out these different scenarios and say, all right, well, it looks like I really need to be prepared for a bad economy. So my senior year, I'm going to get an internship. I'm also really going to try to get good grades so that I can get into graduate school and I want. And also, you might say, well, possibly I'll end up living with my parents if it's really bad. So you try to get along with your parents and try to find ways to contribute to the household so that you'll be welcome back in case this all goes this way. Now, it could turn out that the economy ends up being good when you graduate, and all this, is not necessary. But the idea with scenario planning is you're ready for any different scenario that comes about, or at least you're fairly ready to handle that. Scenario planning. And that's all for my for this chapter for planning. Please check out my other videos for other management topics. Again, my name is Mike Knudstrup, and I'm a teacher at Florida Southern College, sunny Central Florida, and I'll be speaking with you on other videos soon. Thank you.